VTEC. We all know and love it. The distinct change in sound at $6 grand. The shove in the back as VTEC kicks in yo. And the symphony of 4 cylinders screaming to over 8,000 RPM on the larger cam lobes. Since the golden age of Honda in the 90s and 2000s, no other manufacturer has made anything like this. We've seen plenty of cars out there with variable valve timing, even cars with variable valve duration, but never one with variable valve lift. Never has there been another car that goes from a small cam lobe at low RPM to a large cam lobe at high RPM. Except one. This is a Celica GTS. On the outside, it looks good, with fast and furious styling, featuring massive side skirts, bumpers, scoops and spoilers, tasteful and period-correct OZ racing wheels, and lots of badges. But what it hides underneath is what makes this car unlike any Toyota ever made. You're used to seeing VVTI on top of most modern Toyota engines. In essence, it's what pretty much every car has nowadays: variable valve timing, and the I stands for intelligent. Similar to Honda's VTEC, where it has 2 smaller cam lobes and at a certain RPM can switch to 1 larger cam lobe, letting in more air and fuel and producing more power, the 2ZZ instead has just 1 smaller cam lobe and 1 larger one. But it does the same thing. At 6,000 RPM, it switches from the small, efficient cam lobe to the big one that opens the valves more and for longer. And as a result, this little tiny 1.8 litre engine from 25 years ago makes 141 kilowatt, or around 190 horsepower, the same power as a stock K24 from just a little 1.8, but obviously it's a bit down on torque. It's only got 181 Newton meters of torque. It revs to 8,000 RPM, it's paired up with a 6-speed manual transmission, and of course power is going to the front wheels. These Celicas were immensely popular back in the day because it was pretty much, apart from the Corolla Sportivo and a few weird models like Scions and things they sold in the US, was pretty much the only Toyota that came with this engine. In fact, it's such a good engine that Lotus went, that would fit fantastically in the middle of their new sports car, the Lotus Elise, they launched in the early 2000s. So not only can you find it in only a handful of Toyotas, but this is also found in a Lotus Elise. And now, the interior. The first question a lot of you will probably have is, do I fit? And actually, yeah, I do. The steering wheel only goes up and down, so it's a little bit further away than I would like. I'm having to reach slightly, but it looks fantastic, nice and small. This one, believe it or not, even has cruise control, which is a big plus for me. I quite like that. The transmission, it doesn't feel particularly great. It just feels like rubber and cables are just kind of having to slide past each other and just mush. And then there's the gauges. I still wish they put the tachometer in the middle, and I think there is a TRD gauge cluster that allows you to do that. But then we get to the rest of the interior, and oh dear, there's a lot of grey plastic in here. This centre pocket here wobbles around and is made of the lightest and flimsiest plastic I think I've ever seen in my entire life, and the back seats might as well not even be there because you would have to saw your legs off with a hammer to get yourself into the back. And all of that leads to the conclusion that this is a car made for driving and certainly not sitting in a car park. So let's go and scream this 2ZZ to 8,000 RPM. We all know that everyone's asking to hear some Toyota VTEC, so let me give it to you. The engine is fantastic. Definitely revs, but definitely needs the VTEC to come in much sooner. Like in this one, it doesn't even seem to be coming in until like 6,500 RPM. So you get a brief bit of power at the top end, but there's a hang of a lot of nothing in the mid-range, where it definitely doesn't get going until the higher RPMs. And one definite advantage with, say, a K20 is that the VTEC comes in lower and it revs higher, so when you shift, it can actually stay in the power band, whereas with this, as soon as you shift, it drops out
every single time. Steering feel is pretty good. Like I mentioned, the steering wheel doesn't quite adjust how I'd like, so I'm kind of having to reach a little bit for the steering wheel itself. But once you get on the move, heel toe is perfect, the engine revs up really nicely, and the handling is fantastic. And it does make a pretty good noise. 8,000 RPM is not something that you get to see particularly often. It's obviously very light, and he's got some pretty decent tyres on it too, so it handles really nicely. I think the best way I'd describe it is that, yes, it is a step back from a Type R. It's slower, the VTEC comes in just that little bit higher where it's not quite as potent. Like if it engaged now, then you'd be able to use it, but it engages just that little bit later than you really want. The power is there, it's just right up kind of on the top shelf where you can never quite reach it. If it had slightly shorter gears too, that would also really help, because it would mean that it would stay in the power band a little bit more after every gear change. And if it was able to make a little bit more power, then an LSD would really help it to use it to just yank you through these corners. So definitely slightly shorter gears, slightly lower engaging VVTL, and maybe an LSD, and it would be, honestly, every bit as good as the Type R. So allow me to finish with one last 8,000 RPM blat. And I will very much look forward to seeing you again next time.